Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the F4L Headquarters Podcast. I am your host, the F4L Icon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, you guys are too much. Really, you guys are way too kind. Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome, guys, to the F4L Headquarters Podcast. I am your host, the F4L Icon, Sean Jazz Stevens. All right, everyone, here we are. Another episode of the F4L Headquarters Podcast, and this one is a little different. I had an opportunity to do this, which is why I'm able to do it. And because I'm about to become extremely busy over the next few days and weeks and so forth, I have to take these opportunities to do these shows when I can for you guys and whatnot. This show is a little different in the sense that I'm going to be answering questions that we've been gathering, that I've been getting from all over the place. The YouTube icon, the icons of the F4L from YouTube, whether it be email, whether it be on social media. I'm going to address those issues and those questions today, and offer some other tidbits and some fun trivia for the middle of the week, and maybe even, since it's Wednesday and all, maybe even give you guys some motivational quotes, as I am known for such things. So, that being said, let's start this thing off right. Let's welcome everyone here. So, let's do this the new way. First and foremost, let's start it up. All right, everybody. The ants have done such a great job with their vocals and playing the instruments. I mean, who knew that ants not only could they transition and sing some things like they normally do with our normal transition music, but they've really been working hard on their singing skills. I mean, listen to how effortlessly they sing the Star Spangled Banner. I mean, amazing job by the Ant Band. Let's give them a round of applause. Well, you just did, so let's not start that up again. All right, everyone. So, I had asked on social media, well, I kind of cheated, all honesty. I've been getting emails via email and also on the YouTube shows and so forth and so on. Even snail mail and again, some on social media. And while I'm going to be on the air here today, I'm going to be checking randomly to see if anybody has asked anything, in which I will answer that in the order in which they come in. So we're going to be doing a Q&A for you guys, the fans, and answering questions for people who have always had questions and would like some ideas and some notifications, some clarification on some things, and address some various issues and topics. And there's really been some interesting questions as of late and whatnot, so I'm going to address some of those right now. So, Ants, start us up with the first topic, guy. Yes, and hello, this is the F4L icon, Sean Jazz Stevens here, and no one called on the phone, especially not the old school phone that is, but I thought that would be a cute way to answer the first emails, or the first questions I've been getting. So the first question I got was, and people who ask the questions, they know who they are, so I don't want to embarrass everybody or call people specifically out. And also, nowadays everybody has an alias anyway, so 9 out of 10 times it wouldn't be the real person anyway directly. So let's I'm just going to answer the question. The people who wrote the question and asked the question, they are obviously of knowing who they are, but I'm going to address those questions. So here we go. So the first question came from someone via the YouTube wrestling show, and they wanted to know, thus far, 2023, what has been the match, or what is the match that I had. I like this question, actually, so I want to make sure I read this correctly. So the question is, so far in 2023, I've kept on saying that there's been great matches, and the question was asked, out of all of the matches, has there ever been a really huge surprise that you would have expected a different outcome in? And a follow-up question that somebody else asked is, have I ever been upset by an outcome of one of the, quote, dream matches, even back in the day or currently? And the answer to that question is, I have to say, I think people who are really excited about 2023 are probably newer viewers. We've been kind of having the same amazing shows for years. I think that every time I get to call a match, I don't know what's going to happen. I like that aspect of not knowing who's going to win and lose. My son and I go through the roster, and we go through who's had a match recently, and considering the Dream Masters roster, for example, has 100 people on it, and it's broken into two different divisions, the Telenet Universal Division and the BAMMA Division. Prior to this year, we really had like multiple titles, and we separated 4 days. And actually, because you, the fans, have been wanting more content, you guys want more of us, we are, going back. We're going to be going back to the old format we originally did in 2024. We've been doing the experiments lately, doing the pop-up shows here and there on a Tuesday or a Friday or a Monday. Scheduling permitted, however, we really do plan to become the alternate for the alternate of pro wrestling. So that being said, in 2024, schedules permitted, we plan, whenever the wrestling's on, we're going to be the alternative on YouTube to bring that to you. As far as have I ever been upset about an outcome, the way I look at it is it's a win-win situation. Regardless of who wins and who loses, the fans and the people who get to see a stellar performance are the true winners. If two people are in a match, for example, they're there because they've earned that opportunity, and because 9 out of 10 times they've earned it on their own. Actually, all of the time it's on their own. Anyone who watches our show kind of has an idea and kind of knows how our shows work, or they should have an idea anyway, how they work. We have, every division, both the Telenet Universal division, which is more the entertainment type, and the world-class athlete kind of things. So, for example, on the Telenet Universal division, which is another question I have, how do I separate who goes where? I think that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's take one question at a time. So the first question is, have I ever been surprised by an outcome, or have I been upset about an outcome? And the answer is no. Because ultimately, whoever wins, it's because they dug in deep. But in all honesty, even when a person comes up a little short, they still put on a clinic and stand up for themselves and make themselves an overnight name because of their resilience and the fact that they put up a fight against someone as tough as whoever won. So I don't get upset, and I don't hold any gripes, and I also don't have any kind of control over it anyway. So that addresses the first question. And the other question is regarding that was, how do we, being my son and I, separate who goes on what roster? And that is a more complicated question, but not really. Between my son and I, we scour everywhere. We look everywhere, and what we like to do is recognize absolute real-life dream masters for the males and real-life dream warriors for the females. And we like to recognize people, or sometimes we do it to raise awareness to someone who we think needs more exposure or needs more people to know who they are. Recently, I've been doing the difference between my son and I is I am more of the outgoing type, and my son is more reserved. But we don't bring anyone on, we don't invite anybody in, and we don't just add someone to the roster without both of us agreeing upon it. And the same thing goes when we remove someone. And actually, to be honest with you, my son actually has control over the terminations. There have been people where my son just says, we're not going to have them here anymore, or we're not going to have that person here anymore. Get rid of them. And that's the end of it, for various different reasons. And sometimes what we look at is, what is this person known for? And so that's kind of where the first thing comes from. The first question is, how do we figure out who goes where? And ultimately, my son and I, usually put our heads together as far as who does what on those shows, and what is the person known for? For example, someone like Dane Cook. Someone like Dane Cook, for example, who is a comedian from Boston, who is also known to be kind of a tough guy, as far as roles that he's done and so forth. But for the most part, he's known as a comedian, a showman, an actor, a comedian, an activist, kind of a thing. So in that sense, Dane Cook would be on the Telenet Universal division. That's where the entertainers kind of a thing is. Entertainment and world-class athletes versus MMA or BMX or any kind of combat sports. That would be on the opposite thing. But then you have someone like, let's take Jackson Robert Scott, or Jackson R. Scott as we call him, the Prodigy. The Prodigy's been on our shows for years, and he's been on the BAMMA division. But really, the reason why Jackson's over there is because he was part of the BA roster, because Jackson R. Scott comes from the horror realm, and because he just fit when we first started doing the shows. Jackson ended up on that roster and just took an instant liking. Fans liked him, and he performed well on that roster. Became a multiple-time BA champion, held the title ridiculously longer than anyone else, defeated some of the biggest names in BAs in the world in all kinds of genres. So, that in that sense, even though Jackson R. Scott might be an actor, and you could say that, he should be on the other side of things, Jackson, because of the roles that he's done, considering a lot of the horror roles he's done, he's got a little bit more edginess to him. He's actually done commentating on the show, actually. So Jackson is on the BA MMA division because we have merged the two this year. But then you look at two athletes like this year, for example, 2023. Taking two different athletes randomly. Let's take someone like Speedy Easton McDonald, who just joined this roster this year. Speedy Easton McDonald is tremendous in Greco-Roman wrestling, but he's also really good in football, and he's good in baseball. He's not stuck to one sport. He's an all-around sportsman. He's also very much a showman when it comes to when he puts 100% into every sport he plays. But because of the fact that he's not really into the MMA world or combat sports, because there's a difference between wrestling and combat sports. There's a difference, believe it or not. Even though wrestling sounds like it's a physical thing and that it is a grimy thing, and it may be true that some of the people in the BA MMA division have wrestling in their arsenal as well, but in all honesty, it's more reserved for people who are trained in some type of actual combat sports. In all honesty, wrestling, high school wrestling, say, the biggest thing to know is, and the biggest difference people have to understand about high school wrestling, amateur wrestling, is really you're not allowed to do anything that's going to risk life or limb within a match. So putting someone in a chokehold, for example, would be very much a disqualification in a wrestling match, standard in high school. But if you put someone in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu match, obviously that's a legitimate thing. So Speedy Easton McDonald, because he's a tremendous athlete in general, just between football, baseball, and wrestling, just those sports alone, he fits in the Telenet Universal division because he's a world-class athlete. Another person that comes to mind is Riley Simmons, the gymnast. He is a world-class athlete, and you really wouldn't compare him to be an MMA fighter or a combat sports person because he's very, very athletic, and is very charismatic. He's very much a great role model. But also in general, he has tremendous work ethic, and he's a great gymnast. So therefore, he would be on the Telenet Universal division. Now, there is times like we have Grayson the Super Duck Russell, who started for a little while on the Telenet Universal side of things and then transitioned into the BA side of things because Grayson the Super Duck Russell is trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well as wrestling. He's really good in wrestling, but he's also really good in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's why Grayson the Super Duck Russell is on the BA MMA division, and Easton McDonald and Riley Simmons is on the Telenet Universal division, right? Yeah, does that make sense? Teams like Henry and Jairo Mena, the Mena boys, why are they on the BA MMA division? Well, because both Henry and Jairo Mena are going to be future UFC champions. UFC, MMA, it's all into the same realm of the same kind of sport. They are not necessarily known for being on television, and even though they're very charismatic, don't get me wrong, they could do anything they want to when they set their minds to it. But they are going to be known for future UFC champions because that's their heart. Their heart is competing. And and also their loyalty to the fan base and their family and so forth. So that is why the Menya boys, Henry and Harold Menya, would be on the BA MMA division. Now this year we had a newcomer, Big E, Elijah Furton, who for a while was on the Telenet Universal side of things. And he held the title over there a few times. And then he got moved to the BA MMA division. And why is that? Because Big E, Elijah Furton, other than just being a football or a wrestling guy, he also trains in martial arts. And if you want my opinion, and I'm not trying to ruffle feathers or whatever, Big E might be one of the few people who actually legitimately may also have interest in the actual pro wrestling piece of it as well. I think Big E, Elijah Furton might be possibly one of the only members on the BA MMA division who might aspire one day to become a professional wrestler on top of everything else. And I think he has the showmanship for it. He has the personality for it, and he also has the work ethic for it. And we're going to get into what that is anyway, because someone asked me what wrestling school consisted of, but we'll get there. But yeah, so that is going to be the case. Yeah, I just also want to give you guys a heads up. My wife has an order coming. She had done some grocery orders, so I'm going to be retrieving her grocery orders as she is at work, as I am multitasking. This is what happens when you work together as a unit. So if I step away, I'll let you guys know, and I'll be right back with you guys as I am multitasking, waiting for a delivery from one of the local delivery peoples. And then I just want to make you guys aware of that. But Big E, Elijah Furton, going back to him, he was someone who started on the Telenet Universal division because he had that showmanship about him. He also he had multiple sports he could do. But in all honesty, I don't think that I honestly, after seeing everyone he has been in the ring with over there, he would fit better. And my son and I both agreed that Big E, Elijah Furton would probably be better off in the BA MMA division because he'll have competition over there that isn't the same over and over again. And there are people who also train in martial arts like Big E does. I think people might forget that Big E, Elijah Furton, not only is he a tremendous football and wrestler, but he also has the combat skills to back it up too. And he's got the showmanship. And I think, I could be wrong, I feel that I see a wrestling fan in the heart of Big E, Elijah Furton. He has the personality for it. I've seen it. So, and I am someone who's done it myself, so I get it. And in all honesty, I can see a lot of myself within people like him, because I mean, we all start somewhere, right? So there's that. So I hope that answers that question. So it really depends upon what the person is known for, which division they show up in, the Telenet Universal division or the BA MMA division. And in case you're wondering, yes, they are both hyphenated in some aspects. So Telenet, meaning television, media, whatnot, and then Universal, meaning that they are world-class athletes or what have you. People like the Lucky Ones, for example, Jack and Tim, who are tremendous athletes, yes, but they're more known for their musical skills and their tremendous work ethic. And by the way, their music is crushing it right now. I don't know if you guys have heard Sunday at Church. It's a great song. Really got to go listen to the Jack and Tim, the Lucky Ones, Sunday at Church. It's a great song. To see their progression in music has been tremendous, and they're one of the few people out there who are, at that level, who actually acknowledge and willingly admit to listening and watching our shows, because they know when they have time, they know that it's good for a laugh and it's also a lot of fun. And they get how it works. And my son and I both agree in that we both respect the heck out of the Jack and Tim, because especially since being a father-son run group, a show, we do tend to kind of have more of a heart towards, father-son groups and father-son duos and so forth. So that's kind of why, like, teams like the Lucky Ones would be there, or your New Zealand family, for example. Sam and Denzel were on the Dream Masters Telenet Universal Division. Why? Because, again, YouTube is a Telenet Universal Division type of thing. They're not necessarily known for being tough guys or anything like that, except for on our shows. They don't compete in martial arts or anything like that, so that's that's the division they are belonging to. So, hope that answers the question as far as how we figure out who goes where. Ultimately, it depends on what their goals or admiration, what they're known for. The Adele Boys, for example, the Adele Boys could easily... You could take an Adele boy, and there's 4 of them, and maybe we've actually contemplated even maybe trying it next year. You could legitimately take 2 of them and put them on 2 different shows, but then it would just be pandemonium. So that's why we usually keep the Adele boys on the Telenet, on the BAMMA division, because they fit all those categories, check all the boxes. They are world-class athletes, but they're also tough they are future UFC champions and so forth. That's why they're over there. And I don't know if you guys watched last night, but last night we had the conclusion of our open team of our 2023 Team Warfare tournament, and I don't think anybody is surprised to know that the Adele Boys have won the Telenet, have won this year's Team Warfare event. I don't even know if they know that they won, because they're busy, achieving in real life as much as on our shows. But I got to make sure they know that they won yet again. Another tournament goes into the realm of the Adele Boys. Last year they weren't able to participate because they were a man short. This year there was 4 of them. So all 4 of the Adeles meet a team, and of course they won. So there you go. And hopefully that answers that question as far as who goes where. It makes perfect sense to us in a way. That's just how we break it into things. All right, get to the next question. Okay, so the next one I have is when it comes to pro wrestling versus high school wrestling, what is the difference between the two? When I say wrestling versus high school wrestling, well, this is kind of self-explanatory. I think this is kind of easy to answer. I think it's also understandably also. So, I did both wrestling styles. I did amateur or high school wrestling and high school Greco-Roman wrestling, high school level. And then my ambition was to become a professional wrestler. That would be the stuff that you see on the TV. So as far as what the difference is between the two, a lot of differences. For example, as I mentioned earlier, in amateur wrestling or high school wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, the goal is to get the pin, or by points or whatever. It's not really about hurting the other opponent. There's no submission kite holds, there's no locks, in fact, you're not really allowed to do anything that's going to risk life or limb. That's like an underlying rule of amateur wrestling. And pro wrestling, on the other hand, which is more for the showmanship kind of a thing, where there are definitely aspects of the physicalness. I'm not going to downplay that. A lot of people will tell you that, the people who have never done it will tell you that, the high school wrestling or the amateur wrestling is the real stuff, and the professional wrestling is the, quote, fake stuff, which absolutely makes me cringe every time I hear it, because if people actually knew the physicalness that goes into becoming and goes into pro wrestling, which another person asked about that, and I'll answer that when it gets to that, so I hope that person understands that. But basically, one of the biggest misconceptions is that professional wrestlers do the, quote, fake stuff because they can't really fight or they're not really tough. And that is the exact opposite, and that is not 100% accurate at all. I think there are certainly people in the pro wrestling world. There are some who are legitimately known to be tougher than others. But that's just like everything else in life. There's always that one person as something that has that extra oomph than somebody else. It doesn't mean that it's worse or whatever else. I think when people think of pro wrestling and they think it's, quote, fake, they're referring to the storylines in the over-the-top, like, as we call it, the male soap opera stuff. In that aspect, yeah, you're right. That there's a lot of that in pro wrestling, but as far as when it comes to the actual action and the art of actually going into a ring and putting on the show, there's really no difference between the physicalness. In fact, even more dangerous than high school wrestling, because the people who are doing the matches or putting on the professional wrestlers who are stepping into the ring and the goal difference is one is more for themselves and for medals and accomplishments. The other is for more of a showmanship kind of a thing. So I want you to put this in perspective. Two high school wrestlers are wrestling to become state champions, right? That's important to them. They want to get scholarships and so forth. It's a money-driven thing to become famous for their work ethic and be the best in wrestling so they can become, Olympians, say. And that's a great goal. That's a great ambition. But pro wrestlers are more about putting on the show for the audience. So instead of, just putting someone in a headlock or going for a pin, there's going to be more action to that. Definitely it's changed a lot since I started wrestling in 1998 to now. And that, in all honesty, if you really think about it, that's really not that long. 25 years ago, I think we said, 25 or 24 years ago, is how long I've been part of pro wrestling. But prior to that, I did the high school wrestling. I've also done mixed martial arts since I was 4. I started training when I was 4. I started doing competitions when I was 5, so a year later. And back then we called them freestyle tournaments, not martial art tournaments or mixed martial arts. That term didn't come until later on. In all honesty, basically what mixed martial arts is and what freestyle is the same thing. It's just people who are cross-trained, as we called it, in multiple different disciplines, which is what you study, whether it be judo, karate, kenpo, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and whatnot. And as I pointed out before, back then you didn't talk about doing any of those things in school because you would be setting yourself up to all kinds of issues that you don't want. Now it is considered to be respected, and you're kind of one of the in crowd if you are someone who can handle yourself. Then again, I'm not so certain of that either. I'm not so certain that there isn't that one person who wants to try you. If they know that you have that reputation for outside of the school, there's always going to be that one knucklehead who's going to want to try you at school or try you on the playground to see just how tough you are. And that's the kind of the pros and cons of allowing people into your world and letting people know what you do outside of, the people you do it with. Social media in that aspect has, in a lot of ways, it's given people a lot of ways to be proud and show their accomplishments, sure, and to network with other people. But all honesty, and we're going to get into this a little later on because someone else asked the question again, and I'm going to clarify it again why I said what I said before. But to go back to the original question, the biggest difference between pro wrestling and the amateur wrestling is really one is more for putting on a show, the other is about winning and is more about continuing on your journey for the glory, so to speak, versus the aspect of showmanship. Like, it's about the techniques versus the other. I hope that helps. So, next one. Okay, so the next one we have is someone, as I mentioned, as I alluded to earlier, someone asked, what was professional wrestling school? I've talked about it before. What do you learn in professional wrestling school? That's a great question. First and foremost, I'm glad someone asked rather than guess. And here's the thing, right? In everything we do in life, it's always good to know what we're getting into. And pro wrestling is a business. It's also a very intense work environment too. And there's a lot to learn that goes into the pro wrestling world. A lot of things a lot of people don't even think about. Most people who go into pro wrestling, and I'm glad someone asked about the wrestling school, because I really wanted to go into this over the weekend. I just didn't have the opportunity or the time to do so. So this is the true story of it's always a true story, but anyway, my first day in wrestling school, I was 18 years old technically, because remember, I started pro wrestling school as of it would actually be 25 years or 24 years it was November 4th, 1998. So I'll let you guys do the math. When I first started professional wrestling school. Prior to me going to wrestling school, I had to look into how do you become a pro wrestler. And prior to knowing about these wrestling schools or whatever and the old ways of doing things, and one of the things that a lot of the people who didn't want or weren't supportive were that I didn't know anybody in the business. I wasn't the tallest kid in the world. I was only 6 feet tall. I was really in good shape considering my three sports: soccer, swimming, and wrestling. I should say soccer, aka football to the real audience. Wrestling during the winter, and then springtime was swimming. So those are three prominent sports that all take a lot of conditioning and a lot of work ethic. And also, I had a reputation for kind of liking to be in the gym. I was always lifting weights and always being healthy and whatnot. So that's kind of one of my things. Then, of course, I played sports outside of school. I had the martial art tournament, so I always had to do that, but I wasn't the biggest kid in the world. I put on the muscle weight somewhat as far as that went, but the fact that I was bone thin prior to me doing any of these things didn't help matters. It really just was, muscle on top of the skin, if you would. So that's the first aspect. But, I had to find out how to become a pro wrestler since I didn't know anybody in pro wrestling. Like, for example, a lot of people have heard of wrestling families like the Harts, and they were all trained by Stu Hart, the father of Bret the Hitman Hart and Owen Hart, and all those Canadian guys in the Calgary area were usually trained in the dungeon, as they called it, which was Stu Hart's dungeon, which was a wrestling school in the Hart's house in their basement. That's a legitimately fair thing. And all honesty, they were related to Stu Hart, so of course they were going to learn how to wrestle. The sons of wrestlers, or family of wrestlers. And other people in the area, of course, knew that there was a wrestling school there, and they knew who Stu Hart was, so of course they were going to go there too. But for me, I didn't know anybody in pro wrestling. I just wanted to get in. This is my ambition, and this is what I wanted to do. So I found out that the school that I wanted to go, there was a couple of options, and the school I ended up wanting to go to was not far away from me. It was the Killer Kowalski School of Wrestling. It was in Malden, Everett, in Massachusetts. Some other prominent names who have graduated from that school, or what we call alumni, consists of, Triple H, currently the CEO or the head of talent relations or whatever his title is now of WWE. He went and he is an alumni of Killer Kowalski School of Wrestling. The late great Chyna, ninth wonder of the world, woman wrestler Chyna, is a former graduate from the school. Perry Saturn, John Cronus of the Eliminators, myself, Frankie Kazarian, Albert, for those people who go back a while. Big John Studd is a huge name that came from over there. A lot of people aren't aware. Pat Patterson, legendary Hall of Famer and the mastermind of things like probably more known for his booking or storyline development, coming up with things like the Survivor Series or the Royal Rumble. But when he wanted to break into wrestling in the United States, coming from Canada, he first learned in Boston by Killer Kowalski, of all places. So Kowalski had a lot of big names who have gone through the school, so I thought it was a no-brainer to go to Kowalski's school. Plus, meeting Killer several times prior, it helped, and then I ended up going to his wrestling school, and the rest is history. As far as what does it consist of, wrestling school, what do you learn? Yeah, you're not going to be learning, you're not going to be working on your spelling and your, reading, writing, arithmetic, so to speak. But what you are going to learn is various other things you'd be surprised about, like how to read contracts, how to cut a promo, how to talk and believe in yourself and others, how to sell someone yourself, how to market yourself, how to stand out in a market that is by itself, the history of pro wrestling, learning about the people of the past, where did wrestling come from, the various terms that are called, being able to call a match within the ring without, forgetting something like they do now. It's a different atmosphere back then compared to now. Wrestling schools have evolved over times too, and not always for the better. The wrestling world is an evolving thing, much like everything else in life. And just like every other college or university, there's always a school that is some that are better than others. A lot of people think that they can run a wrestling school because they're a wrestling fan. So what they'll do is they'll, have some halfway talented wrestler come in and run a camp and call that a wrestling school. And you can learn that stuff, but then you got to be careful who you're bringing in and why you're bringing them in. And there's a lot of money that gets to be paid. You have to pay money to go into wrestling school. For me, I had to pay $3,000 to go to Kowalski's school, and that was when I remember I was 18 years old. I had to pay $3,000 to get trained at Kowalski's school, and I had to give that before I even started. So my first day in class, there was 100 people in our class, and I remember it really well because he had everyone in this, in the area. There's a ring right in the middle. I don't know if everybody's ever been to Kowalski's, the old school gym. I think it's probably evolved since then too. But back then, it was an older ring, and it was kind of set up in the middle of this. You're going to go downstairs. It was like set up in the front of you there. And then what we would do is we were all standing on the side, and Kowalski was talking to us about wrestling and what we're going to be learning. And this big guy, and I say this big guy because he fit the mold for an actual wrestler. He was about 6'5" and maybe about 250, and he made the mistake of saying to Killer Kowalski that, why do I need to learn about how to do this, that, and the other, how to sell? It's all fake anyway. These are things you don't say to a wrestler, especially someone who's old school like Killer Kowalski. Something you should know is pro wrestlers absolutely can't stand when someone says what they do is fake, because that's like saying that they're pretend tough. And a lot of the times there are historical cases of people like, the Iron Sheik, Haku, Andre the Giant, Killer Kowalski, Bruno Sammartino, Doc, I think Dr. David Schultz, people of that nature who went to such liberties as to people who said the wrestling was fake. They went out and slapped them in the face, or they put them in a hold and showed them how fake it was. Well, Kowalski came from the same cloth because when people ask me the question, is pro wrestling real or is it fake? I usually tell people it's fake right up until you hit the mat. And that's the best way to describe it. Even if something is planned out and someone says this is how it's supposed to go, there's nothing fake about gravity. There's nothing fake about throwing yourself around a ring that isn't the most comfortable thing in the world. There's a lot of misconceptions on what a ring is made out of. People seem to think it's like falling on a trampoline. It is not like a trampoline. And I'm going to tell you right now how a ring goes, and there's no difference between how they're set up. The general basis of a ring is you have these big, long beams. You heard that right, folks. Big, long beams that go underneath a metal. There's a metal frame, and then you have these metal beams that go right crisscrossed around those beams. And then you take some plywood and you put it on top of those metal beams in such a way that it forms a square around the ring. And then you put about an inch, not even that, about an inch of gymnastics type padding that you might find in your gymnasium. You put that on the ring apron, the ring which makes your, quote, canvas, if you would. And then you take a piece of canvas or a tarp and you put that over the plywood, you tape it down, and ladies and gentlemen, that's your ring. And people who say, well, there's springs underneath there's no springs underneath the ring. The springiness that you see in a wrestling ring, that's from those beams I talked about. The way they work is because they're so long that they give the ring the shock. They're meant to take the shock of the ring, kind of like a piston of a car kind of a deal. So when the plywood, anyone who's ever used plywood knows that plywood's very cheap in general. It's very light and can be moved somewhat. And which is also why sometimes it can be damaged and broken and so forth. But in retrospect, what happens is once you take that down and you have that 1 inch padding that goes over that, and then the canvas and the top goes over that, that's it. That's all you have for a ring. The ropes that you have that you see people running off of, those are actually metal cables that are spun so tight. You heard that right, folks. Like electrical cables, they're so tightly wound that they have like a rope consistency. But with those are wrapped in like electrical or athletic tape to resemble colored ropes. And that's what wrestling ring ropes are made of, are metal cables. So when you see guys who run the ropes the first day, and I got to tell you, first day in wrestling school, you find out real quick how much of a pain it is. And you never forget what that is. And, you learn all these things. And so to go back to the question of what you learn in wrestling school, it's everything that you need to know about the wrestling business. How to put a ring together, how to build yourself, how to portray yourself, how to speak to an audience, how to sell yourself to an audience, how to negotiate a contract, how to, deal with certain elements of the fans, how to deal with hatred, how to deal with fan mail, how to deal with different other things, workplace environments. The history of wrestling, where did it come from, why is it there, how not to hurt everybody in the ring, because again, much like the only difference between, now I mentioned earlier how high school wrestling, really the purpose is to not do anything with, they're not doing anything to risk life or limb. Pro wrestling, in all honesty, you don't go to the ring purposely to hurt someone. That's where the showmanship comes from. But in actuality, anyone who can tell you who's done anything physical, you run around a ring. I want to take you back to what I just described the ring to be. those ropes that are metal cable that are wrapped in electrical tape, kind of an idea, or athletic tape, that's metal cable running up against sometimes bare flesh when you're running off and off those ropes. The bumps that you see, a bump, for those people who don't know, is when you fall on the mat. That's a bump or a fall. And one of the early things you learn is how to bump properly so you don't hurt yourself or others, how to post so you don't hurt yourself or others, how to protect the person you're in the ring with if you're properly trained. These are the elements of the things you learn, how to do things and not hurt someone else. And also psychology, ring psychology. What should you do? How should you do it? How do you tell a story in the ring? How do you build a story between two people who the audience doesn't know from a hole in the wall? How does the audience know who's a heel and who a face is? Also, you got to learn those terms. What is a heel? What is a face? You go to wrestling school and they'll teach you these things. In short, a heel is a bad guy, and a face or baby face is a good guy. So that's in essence what you learn in wrestling school. So yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and you do get a lot of pain. And a lot of the times when you're starting out your wrestling career, your first jobs are usually either security at a local show or building the ring. In all honesty, you should be building a ring if you're around and you have the opportunity to do so. You should be willing to, if someone's going to be booking you on their show, the least you can do is help them put a ring together. And I can tell you this, there's no one who's ever been to wrestling school who does not know how to put a ring together, because it's one of the fundamentals of the things you learn is putting a ring together. That is one of the early things, putting a ring up and taking it down. And that's a choice. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. But once you get it done, it becomes repetition, like anything else. So there's that. So the next question actually is regarding wrestling and fighting in general. Let's get to that one. So this one here was a question regarding, in wrestling, how does it keep from getting hurt? Have you ever been hurt? Historically, as I've said, I have been injured in the ring. And even though I might be considered one of the safest people in the world to work with, I've never hurt someone else. I have been hurt, though, and that's not because necessarily that, sometimes there's accidents that happen. People either forget a spot or something, or what they call a botch spot where you try to do a move or you try to do something and it doesn't go your way. A good example is someone goes to the top rope to do some type of flying maneuver, and instead of doing what they're supposed to do, their foot slips and they fall and they hurt themselves instead. That's a botch. Or they miss the guy altogether. Again, you're supposed to make it look realistic. But I want to go back to that story I began about the big guy who told Kowalski, the older wrestler, that wrestling is fake. Because in the day, it wasn't as theatrical as it is now. In the Killer Kowalski days, you did grapple. You scrapped, if you would. Some of the best grapplers, if you would, in Olympian wrestling skill type people, the Danny Hodges of the world, they were collegiate wrestlers prior to going to pro wrestling. The Vern Gagne's and all of those guys, these are legitimate athletes who into pro wrestling. It isn't because they're not tough. It isn't because they're not weak. It isn't because of any of that. It's because they enjoyed it more so, and that's kind of what they ended up doing. But the big guy who was 6 foot, he was a big guy, as I said before, this guy was 6'5" or so, and about 260. He was a big guy, looked at the standard for a wrestler, who told Kowalski, what do I need to learn all this stuff for? It's all fake anyway. So Kowalski had him come into the ring where he was, and Kowalski put what was known as the stomach claw on him. The stomach claw, by the way, was one of Killer Kowalski's signature things. It is legitimately what it sounds like. It is a claw. His hand goes into the person's abdomen, and he's basically squeezing the stomach. It might not sound too appealing. It might sound ridiculous, but until you've had it on you, and mind you, Killer Kowalski had gigantic baseball-sized hands. So imagine getting a claw or having a hand the size of a baseball glove wrapped in your ribs and someone squeezing it. That's what the Kowalski would do. So it was a stomach claw that he put on this guy, and within 3 seconds the guy was on the ground. And Kowalski asked the guy who was screaming in pain at that point, "How fake is it now?" And that was the lesson that Kowalski taught us. The lesson was wrestling is fake until you hit the mat. It is not fake, and you protect it, all aspects of it. It's not that it's fake. It's, we do things, and we do things for the showmanship part of it, but there's nothing fake about what people do, the risks that are involved, the physicalness that goes into it. And remember, I came from combat sports prior to me going into pro wrestling, and there are other people who've done even more than that. Then if you want to go on that realm, there's been several Olympian athletes who've gone into pro wrestling. I don't think anybody would go to any one of those people, the Ronda Rouseys of the world or the Kurt Angles of the world, and tell them that they are fake, because they will tie you up and they will do what they call shoot on you, and you'll find out how fake it is. Those old school wrestlers, and even myself, I'm offended when someone seems to think that because I am a pro wrestler that I am not as tough as they might be in whatever sport that they consider to be a, quote, real sport. So there's nothing fake about gravity. There's no cables. There's no net. And again, I want to point out, if you've ever seen a wrestling match, you've ever seen someone wrestle, if you've seen someone fall from the top rope and onto that mat, yeah, legitimately landing on exactly what I told you they were landing on, plywood and metal beams, folks. Doesn't that feel comfortable? And they do that over and over again, and they do it willingly. Match every single time. I want you guys to picture that next time you look at a pro wrestler and you understand that they're throwing themselves on plywood and metal beams for the entertainment of their audience. So, how many times, I want to, put in perspective, how many people have ever fallen on ice, or anyone who's ever had a serious fall? Well, imagine doing that to yourself, throwing yourself on that mat over and over again, front, back, flip. There are multiple ways to bump, but those who do it safely tend to do so and don't get as hurt as others. Does it hurt? The next day you definitely feel it. The next day you feel the effect of the bumps that you took the night before, the first day. But what happens is, like any other sport, I think any athlete can probably understand what this is. That adrenaline gets going. You can't feel much of anything once it starts. I know for myself, a lot of people know, that feeling you get when you come out from that crowd. You come from behind the curtain, the crowd either, cheers for you or they boo you, whatever the case may be. But the fact that you have the control of that audience, number one, they know who you are, and they want to see something that happens with you. There's an adrenaline rush that you get that is unparalleled to anything you'll ever feel. So when it comes to feeling a lot of pain, in the match you might not feel much of anything. There are many times where people will get hurt. I've been one of those people. I've been hurt without realizing I've broken a wrist or I dislocated a thumb. I had my teeth. That's one of my most famous stories is my teeth. People look at my front teeth and notice that I am missing 2 teeth in the front. Well, that came from a chair spot. That's right, a chair. I know that someone asked this prior, and I'm just going to answer it out of context because it fits right here. Are the chairs and the tables and whatnot all rubber, or how does that work? The chairs are real. The tables are usually gimmicked, as they call it, much like everything else. They're usually gimmicked. But the chairs are real. They are steel chairs, and the way that works is, one, by, again, going to wrestling school to properly know what you're doing so you're not either hurting yourself or others. But to put on that performance, you need to be able to know how to take a chair shot. But in retrospect, the chairs are metal. And if you've ever played soccer, for example, and you do your head bumps with a ball, picture that with a chair. That's kind of the consistency I get. But again, when you're doing the adrenaline and you're in the middle of a match and you're feeling, you got all that adrenaline and all that energy, and you're feeling the energy from the crowd who are really in there, whether they're there for cheering for your head on the platter or they're wanting you to get up and get back into the fight. You don't feel much while you're in the match. You're just too focused on entertaining those audience and paying attention to how they're reacting. I think the old school way of thinking, and one of the biggest, most disrespectful things that an audience can chant is boring to a wrestler. Kowalski said that if they start doing that, you put on a chin lock and just sit there and teach the audience. They're not dictating your match. You're telling them. And ultimately, that's kind of what it is. I think nowadays, the wrestlers do the opposite. The wrestlers listen more to the fans and give the fans what they want, whether that puts them off their job or the business as a whole in jeopardy when you do that. Mistakes can happen when you do that, when you let the people who don't know how this works and they don't know the logistics of things. When you have the audience tell you what you're supposed to do in a match and dictate your match, then you've taken away the control of yourself and you made it about them. It's supposed to be you showing the audience what you're doing, not the audience telling you what they want you to do. You are not a puppet for them. You are an entertainer for them. You are entertaining them, certainly, and another thing you learn is in wrestling school, going back to that question, is how to interact with fans and keep yourself, one, make sure you're loyal to your fans who, again, if you have your fans there, they'll be there for you the rest of your life. But again, there has to be that boundaries. You have to set those healthy boundaries. Otherwise, you're going to have people come into your house. You're going to have people sending death threats to you. You're going to have all kinds of issues you do not want in general. But I mean, I hope that's a long way around answering the question as far as does it hurt. The adrenaline's running, you don't feel anything while you're in the match. After the match, you might feel it for a little while. My two teeth are missing in the front because I got hit in the face with a chair. It was a metal chair, and in case you're wondering, yes, I know how to take a chair shot. But unfortunately, the chair ricocheted and then ended up chipping my tooth, and that's ultimately what happened. But I didn't know the tooth was missing until like halfway into the match. That's right, folks. I got my teeth busted, and I continued to work in the match. Went about 20 minutes in that match, and I got hit with the chair within 2 minutes of the match. So 2 minutes with broken teeth, blood running from my mouth, which I wasn't aware of until later. So, as far as the tough aspect, you do tend to get used to things. The bumps you get used to, landing on the back, landing on the front. But also, you have to take into account, like now I'm 44 years old, and I've been in the ring a little while. But if you ever wondered why wrestlers in general feel a little bit more pain in the bad weather, well, I mean, come on, we threw ourselves around plywood and metal beams for the entertainment of many people for a number of times, over and over again. Your body is going to listen to that. In martial arts, really, they also teach you how to fall, how to land, so when you get kicked or get hit, you learn how to fall. You learn that in wrestling school as well, but then some. I remember learning how to fall in judo. They showed you how to take a fall but it's a different story in wrestling because, especially since why you're taking the shot and why you're taking the fall. But anyway, getting off topic. But in general, yes, it can hurt the next day, but you get used to it. The adrenaline runs through you so much that during the match you don't really feel much of anything in the moment for the most part, unless it's a really significant injury. And yes, I've had a significant injury. I had my knee blown out of its socket about 30 minutes into an hour match. You heard that right too. And I still had to finish the match with a busted knee. I couldn't stand on the knee. And I had to still finish the match. They popped my knee back into place on the side of the ring, and I continued on the match. I'd never had surgery on the knee, which I should have, but the doctors, that's one of the reasons why the doctor said I wasn't allowed to go to a gym and work out for a little while until it was completely healed and fused together again, which is what led me into going to regular school, and now you know about that. So, that answers that. All right, let's get to the next question. Another question regarding icons of the F4L is, between my son and I, which one of us is a higher, takes things to heart more as far as our individual responsibilities, or how do we break up our responsibility was another question, which is kind of the same idea as this one. So a lot of people ask this question a lot. How do we break up who does what? Well, it's simple. Everything's done together. Commentary these days is mostly done by me, in case you've noticed, except for like the big shows and like the end of the show, the end of the year, he'll be joining me for the end of the year live watch along. So he'll be part of that again, as that's where else we'll be announcing the Jazz and Sons Hall of Fame for the 2024 class. But for the most part, we book all the matches together. We decide everyone who's going to be in the Hall of Fame. We decide who's going to be on what roster, who's coming, who's going. The matches, we usually choose a few matches as far as the matches of the year, and then we kind of put it in a thing and decide which of those four will be shown, and that's what usually we'll watch during the watch along. So that's kind of how that works. We split those things. I usually handle the email stuff. That goes back to when my son was younger. Because remember, my son, when we began this journey, he was 11 years old. And I wasn't about to have a bunch of people emailing my son. I do have ethics, and I do know how things work. So, because believe it or not, folks, I'm very protective of everybody, including especially my kids. Some people might say I'm a little bit too protective. It's one thing to do a show with my son and put him out there and, you have his voice doing things. It's another thing to have people who he doesn't know to email him. So in general, I handle all the emails for everything, but he looks at the statistics and he keeps an eye on those types of things. That's something he's into. He likes math. I don't know. Don't ask me. we together go over the cards for the most part. He, for the most part, is on the Telenet Universal side of things. I'm on the BAMMA side of things as far as where we're kind of showing up on the shows. So there's that. So hopefully that answers that question as far as which one of us does what on the show, what our responsibilities are individually. But, any conversation that has to do with the show, we communicate together. And actually, coming up, he's suggested that I get a commentator. As much as he loves doing the shows with us, as far as, booking the shows and all that stuff, I think one of the elements that we've been missing is that commentary team. Hearing me talk about amazing people is great, and I love being able to do that for people, but I feel like it's a different story and a different feel if there's another person to bounce things off of. It brings more to the showman part of it. So Presently, he and I are currently looking at our roster actively. We feel that might make more sense, considering the ongoing joke is, since I am a character and he is a character, and there are times when we have to call commentary, we're thinking that someone from the roster on either one of the shows should be the person to take over the helm as one of the commentators with me and him on a on more of a regular basis. When he can't do something, they will. It has been something that's been thrown about for a little while. This has been something that I have attempted, and this is something he thought about sooner. And we will be right back with you folks right after this. Okay, folks, we are back. I apologize. Yeah, it was a little bit of a break here. Unfortunately, I had to, as I said before, I had to help bring in some groceries and so forth and make sure that the orders came and whatnot. So that has been done. Thank you very much. Yeah, Ants, take us to our next segment, will you? All right, someone asked me about, the places, where have I wrestled before? And which character, then another question was, which character did I like better, the Jazz Fitness or the Jazz Vengeance? I can't tell you how many times I get this question, actually all of these questions, but that's okay, it's understandable. All right, so the first question, where have I worked as far as wrestling goes? And okay, so let's see if I can label off everyone in order. In my early days, when I first started out in pro wrestling, my first job in pro wrestling was in old school ECW out of Philadelphia. I had what was called a local talent contract, which meant whenever they came to my area, I would be on those shows. All right, that's the first thing. So old school ECW. JCW, General Championship Wrestling, New England Championship Wrestling, and ECW, Ring of Honor, or ROH, and those are there. And then also, when I came back to pro wrestling, I also worked for SRW, Strictly Ruthless Wrestling, and BCW, Bay State Championship Wrestling. And where am I going to be returning? Well, you're going to have to wait and find that out. But that as far as going as talent goes. Working-wise, I've also had a workout tryout with old school TNA or Impact Wrestling out of Florida. And I worked creative for WWE. World Wrestling Entertainment on the creative side of things, and I did that up until this past year, and I've done that twice now. I worked for them. And why did I do that? Because my old first boss is still higher up over there, that being Paul Heyman. So there you go. That's hope that answers that question. As far as who do I like better, as far as a character, Jazz Fitness or Jazz Vengeance, they're both very much just who I am. They're just part of who I am. But they're opposites. See, if I'm going to say which one I'd be more like, I would say I'd be much more like Jazz Vengeance, who is the voice of the people, the bully buster, the guy who does the right thing, regardless, of what the odds were. He was going to be the one to come down with the gavel, which was a kendo stick, and he was going to fight for what was right. Jazz Fitness, on the other hand, he is very much not like how I would view myself. I don't acknowledge Jazz Fitness as being part of my personality, as far as the Jazz Fitness character is more conceited. He's self-absorbed. He's got a bit of an edge to him, very cocky, very arrogant, a little bit chauvinistic perhaps. And a lot of those things. But I think the biggest difference is Jazz Vengeance was very much in shape and was someone who was, built like a brick house. Jazz Fitness, on the other hand, has the body image of an unfit fitness guru, which was the gimmick. But one of the things that they both have in common is I put the same amount of effort and the same amount of energy into both characters. And I honestly, if I'm going to be honest, I probably threw a lot more into Jazz Fitness just because it was such a stretch for me. It was nothing close to what I would examine myself. It was a performance, to say the least, to be Jazz Fitness. first and foremost, a lot of the times when I was doing the Jazz Fitness promos that made Jazz Fitness popular, as again, the YouTube sensation Jazz Fitness, a lot of those YouTube videos, those early days, they were brutal because me personally, I am naturally very athletic. I like playing sports. They come naturally to me, especially team sports. I played multiple things outside of the sports I mentioned in high school. I also played volleyball in my time period. I played tennis once in a blue moon. I played badminton. I played hockey, basketball, baseball, softball. So I've dabbled in pretty much everything that there is to dabble in as far as sports go. Kickball, dodgeball, gymnastics even. So I've done a lot of various different athletic type things. And Jazz Fitness, the character he is the opposite of what a character like him should be. He talks about fitness, but he doesn't look like he has any of himself. But in actuality, I am very athletic for a person even my size, because regardless of how big I might look, I still have that work ethic, the drive. I still could run a ring better than most. I still have the same, sportsman type things. I can still play sports. Those skills don't go away. But the Jazz Fitness character is not supposed to be technically good at sports, which is the comedy part of it. Which is why it was hard for me sometimes to, purposely miss a soccer ball, which I would never do. Get hit in the head with a baseball, which I would not be foolish enough to do. Get hit with a hockey ball, a street hockey ball, when I would never be foolish enough to do that either. But Jazz Fitness, on the other hand, he's a different character, so he did those things. My wife sometimes likes to joke, it's an ongoing joke in the house, that, we talk about a Jazz Fitness promo or a Jazz Vengeance promo, and then there's just me. And I'll just say, well, that's not me talking. That was the Jazz Fitness promo. That was how Jazz Fitness looks at things. And my wife will bring up the fact that they're all you. and it may be true. But I definitely have to say that Jazz Fitness is more of a performance and a stretch for who I really am. Jazz Fitness is a loudmouth and very much just throws his mouth out there no matter who he is or what it's about. I tend to be more reserved unless I have to be. So that's going to be the biggest difference between Jazz Fitness and Jazz Vengeance. So I hope that answers the question. Next one. All right, the next question has, how tall am I? How tall am I? I am 6 feet tall. Hope that answers the question. All right, so, 6 feet tall. Answer your question. Here you go. Next. How do we go? This is a great question. How do we decide who comes on our show, and what is the process of getting them involved? That's a great question. I don't know if anybody's asked that before, but okay. That's a good question. How do we get the people we involve? Now, I think briefly earlier, I mentioned this between my son and I. We usually have our eyes open, or our ears open for various different things that stand out. Pop culture references, things that are popular at the time, or also those things that people might question of the dream match scenario, but also the amazing people in general. People who we feel stand out in a sea of people who do the same thing. So a lot of the times, it will come from social media. My son is on social media. I am on social media. My son has more time than I do to look at some things, so he knows a little bit more deeper than I do. So a lot of the pop culture kind of stuff comes from his aspect. A lot of the people's types things comes more from mine. And then once we kind of go over who we think would be a good fit for one of the divisions, we usually it'd be me who reaches out to the person or people who are in charge of said person. We'll say we'd like to add you to our roster. And depending on who it is and what their reaction is and how invested they are or lack of, that's kind of how that goes. I have to say that over the years, everyone's been very helpful in helping to build the best versions of themselves. Even this year we added people to our roster: Big E, Elijah Furton, Speedy East McDonald, Jaden Brooks. Those names come to mind of people. The Menu Boys. These are the people who have contributed a lot. JoJo the Bodybuilder, another one who have contributed a lot to helping build the best versions of them, as far as sending the things we needed for their Titantrons or for their attires. And then recently, like a lot of people are, they're seeing it and they're starting to get it. So they'll send me the logos and the things like that, and they're, really doing well. As far as, people, getting involved with how they're built, generally speaking, the process, this wasn't necessarily the question, it was how do we go about bringing them, but there is a process to it. After we've kind of figured out who we want to invite to be part of the roster, where we're going to put them, I will reach out usually to them and tell them who I am, what we're doing, why we want to do it for them. And then when that comes into play, we kind of go from there. Usually one of the criteria is you have to follow me at least. So that way there, if you're having a match, for example, if we're going to have a match featuring the person, we want to make sure that just in case I can't necessarily tag that one person, if they are following me, then they can see that I'm doing a show, and hopefully they'll be able to know that they should be watching. Maybe they'll have a match. That's one of the reasons why we have that in there. It should also be said that they should also be following the page, which, if you go by the numbers, it's not always reflecting of that, but trust me, a lot of people do follow, and the rhythms and the viewers is absolutely amazing, I gotta say. But so don't let it fool you. The numbers doesn't fool us as far as how many people subscribed versus how many people watch everything, because that's a different story. But anyway, once that happens, then, if there are people who want to help contribute, they will send me, logos or a design or something they want me to add to their attires. Each person has a set of 4 attires. That's one. So basically, they wear one to the ring. They wear one competing in, and then they have an alternate attire for the opposite. So again, there's a total of 4 outfits total. So one you fight in, one you wear to the ring in one slot, then you have another alternative fighting attire, and then another alternative to wear to the ring to. So a set of 4. So everyone has their own things. And generally speaking, I try to get them to match their personality or their, different specifications, so to speak. For example, if I know someone has a certain favorite color, I will tend to keep them. Put them in certain colors that they enjoy, like reds or blues or whatever. So their gear or their outfits, their attires might have more of their favorite color in it, because it's ultimately a version of themselves. So hopefully that answers that question. And then what happens after that, and I build the people as best as I can, I will then send the people who are modeling them after the images of themselves, which is always interesting. And then if they say that they like everything and that everything's the way they want it, then I'll usually debut them on one of the shows. If there's something they want altered, like maybe their hairstyle is not quite the same, or maybe they want a different shirt or a different attire, maybe they don't want a shirt, maybe they do want a shirt, or whatever the case may be, I will make those altercations before they're ready to go to the air. They won't even get to we're not going to put them up until they are given the green light by the people we're modeling them after. So there is a little bit of a process there. The other part of it is that, it's a two-way thing. And if they tell us they don't like it, then we just pull them all together and there's no hard feelings. It's all done. And then the other time is, we don't force people to be part of the roster. We don't force people to be on the show. We give the option, and they either choose to join or they choose not to. Or not join, that's a weird way to say it. Really what it is free publicity, really, on the person. That's ultimately what it is. It's, if you're on our shows, basically your name's being bantered around in a positive manner regarding something that you're doing. It's free publicity, and you're getting eyeballs and name recognition. And I can tell you how I know this works is because if you take someone's on our roster, any one of them, and you put their name in a Google search thing, I wouldn't be surprised if our videos pop up first representing those people. Because, that's just how we do things, and that's how awesome these people are. So hopefully that answers that question. And then once that's there, we put them up. And if they don't want to be part of it, we don't add them. It's just that simple. I'm not going to force people to be part of something they don't want to be part of. There's nothing worth being so annoying than that. So is that. I remember a good example of that. Someone recently, we were doing the Open MMA tournament. Someone who I thought would be fantastic in the tournament, I reached out to, two people particularly, I reached out to, and I said, we would like to do this for you, and I think it would be great during the Open MMA tournament. Because, again, the winner of that tournament is going to be crowned the icon of MMA. This will be coming out in 2024, will be our fourth year doing it. And this year we've already had doubled our people who we can contribute to that. Last year I reached out to a few people who I thought would be great, and especially since they're associated with people who are actually part of the roster. They know people who are on our roster. So that's always interesting too, in that aspect. I asked someone once, actually it was the night when Noah Tyndall, I asked his dad if any of his mates at school know that he's on our show and how they react. He says some of them, think it's proper fun and whatever, and some of them are like, okay. And for the most part, when I ask people how they like their things, they love them. In all honesty, something, I'm not going to lie to you, one of the things that I actually love the most, what I love hearing the most is when people really are getting so involved in their involvement on our show that the people who are based upon are screaming at their character to get up and getting into it as if it's an actual sporting event. Ultimately, that would be my end goal for anyone. That's ultimately a great feeling to know that I have built someone that resembles someone so much that them themselves want to cheer themselves on. There are a few cases of that are strong, and every time I hear it, it kind of makes me feel happy. So it feels like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm honoring them by doing their thing. And remember, folks, I don't control the outcomes of anything. It's just how it works. And okay, let's go to that next question because that revolves around that. So the question that was asked was why. Well, it's a two-part question. One person asked, why do we not play the game? And why do we leave it up to the system to pick the winners and the losers? That's the first part of the question. The other question someone else asked was, do we actually play the game? And here's the two quiet questions. It's kind of interesting stuff. So first part is, No, we don't play the game ever when it comes to the show, we do not play the game. We don't alter the outcomes. We don't want to have any kind of hindrance to any kind of an outcome. Because the reason why is because of why our show begins in the first place. Remember, the idea of our show was originally called Jazz and Sons Dream Matches. It was a way to find out who is legitimately better than the other. Let them battle it out, and whoever wins, wins. The system picks the winner. We just watch it. And ultimately, if someone is playing the game to get the outcome that they want to happen, then they're forcing the outcome. It's not decided scientifically. It's not decided, unbiasedly. If you're playing the game to get the reaction you want or to get the outcome you want, then it's not really what we're doing. It's not dream matches. It's you playing out the match and getting the outcome you want. But that takes away the element of unbiasedly finding out who is better than who. If we were playing as Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee, my son and I, and one of us was playing of the altar, that wouldn't be a legitimately a claim to find out who was better than who. Because it would come down to how well does my son know how to play the game versus how much do I know how to play the game. In all honesty, if you've ever seen someone actually play the game versus when the system does it, it's definitely a difference, and a noticeable difference. All honesty, if I was to play the game live, like to play the game, it would not look as good as crisp as it does, if I'm being fair. My way of playing games is different than everybody else's. See, I have the whole Mortal Kombat thing. Yeah, that's the other question is, do I actually play the games? There are some games I will play. In all honesty, by orders of my wife, I was made to play this game. Yes, you heard that right, folks. My wife makes me take time to actually play the game versus just do what I normally do. Because to me, it's a work thing. It's a tool. It's not a fun and game to me. A lot of people look at the game and say, well, that's WWE 2K23. It's a video game. And your thing is about video games. And no, we use a video game as a base for what we do for our show. But in hindsight, we run it like a legitimate show. We treat the characters, the storylines as a legitimate rivalry, as legitimate things. People, places, things, whatnot. So there is no game part of that. So if the WWE game's up, and I'm usually working on it, my wife has, in the last 2 years, has enforced me to at least play the game for a little while, every once in a blue moon, in between the show. I am nowhere near as good as half a dozen other people. So, yeah, as far as me playing the game, not like that. Not that game. There are games I will play, and there are games I can tell you never want to play against me. My involvement in my experience with playing video games with other people is, generally speaking, is not always fun as much as people think it is. Because, like, I did a Mortal Kombat tournament one time, and I was told I was not winning correctly. And what I mean by that is, normally in Mortal Kombat, apparently people like to drag out their things, and I don't believe in that. I usually will take the person I'm playing against, go up to the person, just pound on them until they can't move. Apparently that's not something people like. I just bombard them with shots until they can't move, or they can't move, and then I win. And apparently that's not the proper way to play Mortal Kombat, apparently. So, that's why I don't generally do that. And I feel like a lot of the times, if I do play, people get upset because, I just win. Because as nice as I am, genuinely, I am naturally competitive. If I'm playing a game, it's to be competitive. Golf, I'm not very good in, but I'll try. Basketball in the games, I'll play that all day, and I'll play real basketball even more so. I prefer playing real basketball than video game basketball, but I'll play either one. Golf, pool, or billiards, don't ever play me in either one of those if you're not up to the task, because that's a game I can tell you is a game that, genuinely speaking, you have to be really good to beat me in billiards or pool. Bowling, on the other hand, that's a different story. As I've said before, I've done 3 styles of bowling in real life. In video game form, it's not as impressive as it is in real life. In actuality, I might be better in video games than I am in real life, but in hindsight, it's all right. So I hope that answers that question. Next. So I love this next question because it's not about icons of the F4L. Someone asked a great question. What are some of my pet peeves? First of all, great quote, great use of a letter, of a word. Pet peeves. I love pet peeves. And yes, I have my pet peeves. I think everyone has a pet peeve, no matter what it is. For those people who might not know what a pet peeve is, I don't know how you don't. Pet peeve is little things that annoy someone, that are specifically annoy you, particularly, out of everything. Like someone does something, and because it's something that normally annoys you anyway, it'll be even more. You're hyper vigilant to that one thing that'll drive you absolutely annoyed, get you from point A to really ready to flip out in a drop of a hat. That is a pet peeve, something that annoys you tremendously, and it's it's an individual thing. So for me, some of my pet peeves are people who are behind me when I'm writing, or people who read over my shoulder. That is one of my pet peeves. I don't like that. A lot of it, in all honesty, in all fairness, that comes to the fact that I've had work stolen, as far as people trying to take credit for my work. So I am a writer, first and foremost, and I don't really like when people are over my shoulder or, looking to see what I'm writing. It annoys me. That's a pet peeve. Other pet peeves include, I don't know. That's probably the biggest one, is just people behind me when I'm writing, or people who are reading over my shoulder. Or another one is people who pretend to be people who really, trying to find the right word for it. People who go to a store, or they go to the same store every single day, yet they never seem to know what is on the menu of that store, or a restaurant, or what have you. If you drink coffee, for example, and you specifically like your coffee a certain way, it doesn't matter what coffee house you're in, your coffee order, for the most part, will be around the same idea. You do not need to sit there and have the poor girl or guy behind the counter read off everything you have in stock. Because you go to the store, the same coffee shop, 5 days a week. You don't have to ask them every single day what things they have on the menu when you drink the same thing all the time. That's a pet peeve. It's also reason for a clownfish award. Another pet peeve I have, especially during the pandemic, I never talk about the pandemic, because the reason the show started is because I wanted to give people something other than everything else that everyone else was talking about. But one of my biggest annoyances, and it still is at the supermarket or at a checkout section. I follow a 6-foot rule in general. In all honesty, that's a safe practice for everybody. This is something that people should be doing anyway, giving people who you don't know their personal space. And one of the things that absolutely drives me bonkers is when I give people the space in front of me. So that person who's in front of me at the checkout counter, he's going to have all the time they want. Once they're out of the way, I'm going to go to them. But then what happens is, I look behind me, and the person who's behind me is literally right behind me, versus taking a lesson out of me and backing up a few feet. That is a pet peeve of mine, and I don't like it very much at all. So yeah, those would be two pet peeves that I would not enjoy. So people reading over my shoulders, or people looking over my shoulders when I'm writing, people behind me when I'm writing. Also, people who are, at checkout counters or in general, who don't know what proper space is. It just baffles me. Or the people who ask the same question 700 times expecting a different answer, and it's the same answer every single time someone gives it to you. But if you don't like the answer from the first 7 people, the 8th person, you'll listen to them. That's just obnoxious. So there you go. And the other one is people who are too much. So if you go, this is a newer thing, all honesty. People who go to the gym, and I want to point out and say, no offense to anybody who does this, but I have to tell you, it's annoyance to me. When I go to the gym, my favorite thing in the world is when there's no one in the gym, because that means I can use all the equipment without having to wait around for someone else to get done with their, quote, set. And really, the set thing really consists of someone, lifting a dumbbell 3 or 4 times, doing 5 reps, taking a picture, posting it on social media, and then they just pack up and leave. Yes, I've seen this. And yes, I know this is a thing. This isn't changing anytime soon. I get it. But it is annoying, because I go to the gym to work out. I want to be healthy, and I want to get my workout in and out. I have to wait around for someone to get done with the workout bench, because they got to do 5 reps and take a picture in between each rep. Come on, man. It's just crazy. The other thing I get, another pet peeve is just people who take these pictures of them posing for whatever in the mirrors and all these things, and really have no real reason why they do it, other than the fact they want to take a picture of themselves in their mirror. I don't understand why we do that. And another pet peeve is people who refer to multiple people in a picture as a selfie. And my kids have debated about this, by the way. So if you're someone who's on if you take the picture of yourself, it's a selfie, then you would agree with them. My feeling of it is, a selfie, that means you yourself took the picture and you yourself are the only ones in the picture. If there is more than one person in the photograph with you that you're taking, regardless if you took it or anybody else did, if there is someone else in the photo with you, it is no longer a selfie, it is now a photograph, because there is more than you in the photo. The term selfie means self, means yourself, not selves. So there you go. That's my sense, and that's a pet peeve. People who call selfies when there's more than one person in the picture with them. It's not if there's 2 people in the picture, it's no longer a selfie, it's a photograph. Sorry, that's a fact. There you go, those are my pet peeves. I hope you enjoyed it. All right, next question, let's go. Someone asked me what my favorite film is of all time. They heard my film review the other day and apparently wanted to know what films I did like. My favorite 2 films are Real Steel and The Sixth Sense. If you want why, there's many reasons why. From every aspect to all of it, they are all okay. So for Real Steel, for example, Real Steel has the feeling of the family dynamic. It sparks an emotion. It's told in a genuine way. The characters stand out. The casting was perfection. The storyline, although was far-fetched, considering we're talking about basically making a film about rock'em sock'em robots come to life. But if you take that away, it's a story of a father and a son refining each other, and forgiveness and redemption and learning and discovery, and then the Rocky Balboa thing pops up at the end, kind of a deal. That's kind of real steel for me. And how they utilize music and emotions and different dynamics of that nature. Being able to go that extra distance, that's why that's there. The Sixth Sense, M. Night Shyamalan is also my favorite director, oddly enough too. But I want to point out that granted, over the years now, it's become it's kind of a joke now, the Shyamalan twist. But there would be no Shyamalan twist if it wasn't for The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense is the first thing to do that. I want to point out, though, I liked M. Night Shyamalan's work prior to The Sixth Sense, as M. Night Shyamalan has done movies prior. He did a movie that was called Wide Awake with Rosie O'Donnell, Joseph Cross, and a couple other decent names. It was a fantastic little coming-of-age movie. It was nothing like what The Sixth Sense is, but it told a great story, dealt with a lot of heart, and I really enjoyed Wide Awake. It's one of those few films I've never heard anybody talk about. But then there was The Sixth Sense, which anyone who grew up around that era, anyone who watched it, like myself, opening night, and witnessed it all. And me being someone who is willingly I have been known for being the guy to figure out a movie within 5 minutes of a film, no matter what it's going to happen. If it's a murder mystery, I usually know within the first act who the killer is. I usually will figure out what the ending, where the story is going to go. The Sixth Sense, on the other hand, is a movie that blindsided me completely. And I got to willingly say that I was not expecting the ending. And also the things in which it delved into, I can relate to some of those things. A lot of people can't. I would be curious to have a conversation with M. Night Shyamalan, how that was what inspired him to write that, and because that's what clairvoyance is, what Haley Joel Osment's character goes through in there. So phenomenal job, by the way. And also the other part of it, the performances by all the actors, the music, the scenery, everything that I usually break down to the four cornerstones of a great film, they're all highlighted in The Sixth Sense. That's why The Sixth Sense is the favorite film. So there's that. And with that, that'll be the last question for the day. May all your dreams come true, everyone. Peace, everyone.